All right, we're going to get started here in about 2.5 minutes, so kind of stay tuned. We'll get started here shortly. All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Don DeRosa, and I want to welcome you to another expert real estate coaching show. We've been coming to you live on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 7 o'clock, and we try to go from 7 to 7:30, but lately been going from 7 to 8. So tonight we're going to be talking about, we're going to continue talking about buying strategies. If you joined in on our last few shows, we were talking about all the different ways to buy and all the different ways to sell. And specifically, we were able to touch on subject to. We didn't really talk about subject to with a short sale, but we talked about how to take over properties subject to. So if you're interested, there's a couple other programs or a couple other shows out there that you can kind of go watch. Just click on the channel, by the way. I'd love to have you as a subscriber. So if you're interested in learning more about real estate, go to my YouTube channel at youtube.com/Don, D-O-N, last name DeRosa, D-E-R-O-S-A, the number 2. And I'd love for you to subscribe and to hit the notification bell. And that way I can notify you when I'm going to go live. We also talked a little bit about wraparound mortgages, agreement for deeds. And tonight I kind of wanted to round it off and finish out as much as possible and talk about true owner finance, sandwich lease options, and maybe even a little bit about short sales if we've got time. So I'd love to know that you're there. Please leave a comment in the comments section. And that way we can, if you have any questions, you can put them in the comment section and we can kind of go from there. Let's get rid of that. Again, my name is Don DeRosa, and welcome to my show. All right, let's talk about true owner finance. What is true owner finance? Well, before I get into that, let me talk about where we are in this process. As most of you know, and I've mentioned this in the last several shows, we are in a position right now where we've got over 30 million people on unemployment. I haven't seen the numbers today. So if anybody's listening out there, if you could put the numbers in there, I know they've changed. In fact, I really would be surprised if they didn't go up slightly even still, which would push us over 30 million people unemployed or have filed for unemployment. That's creating or will create an really overtaxing burden on what I would call the housing market. Now, we haven't seen it yet, and I suspect you won't see it for a little bit of time because, as I've mentioned many times before, I think people right now are just simply holding their breath going, okay, let's just kind of hunker down. Let's get to a point right now where we are safe, if you will. Let's get through this pandemic and this virus, and let's make sure everybody's safe, make sure we all have our body parts and everything's good before we can kind of exhale and get back out into living a normal life. And I think with that, we're seeing we've been doing this, since maybe the middle of March, beginning of March. And what I've found is, being an expert in this field, I've had a lot of people ask me to be on their shows or talk to me on interviews, and et cetera, et cetera. And I've been on panels before where, we'll have one of us say, oh, everything's going to be fine. And then there's me, the naysayer, going, yeah, I don't think so. I've seen this before. In 2008, I watched this occur. I called for the bubble in 2008, a year before, 2 years before it actually happened. Now, I don't think anybody at that stage would have guessed how significant the Great Recession was in 2008. I don't think anybody could have predicted that. Many people predicted the bubble. And so you have to understand how the process is going or how the process works. As history goes, our country goes through a cycle. And a cycle consists of a buyer's market to a seller's market. And then, that's one cycle, going from a buyer's market to a seller's market and then back down to a buyer's market. That's one full cycle. And historically, we as a nation, as a country, typically go once every 10 years or thereabouts, give or take a few years here or there, to complete that cycle. Late 90s, we went through a small recession. 2008 through 2010, 11, we went through another one. And then we went a good solid 10, 12 years. And we had still, prior to this, we still hadn't tipped into a full recession. We were just kind of gradually coming into more of a buyer's market, flattening out, not really a recession of anything to speak of. We were just, I was noticing as an expert in the industry, I was noticing that things were going a little flat, right? Houses were staying on the market a little bit longer. Prices were dropping a little quicker. So things were starting to what I'll call cool. And then this hit. Well, you have to understand we were in a seller's market, and that means that just about everything worked. If you did a half-hearted rehab, you could still sell it and get quite a bit of money. You could even buy it wrong and then turn around and make a bunch of mistakes. And because the appreciation happened, it helped it along, right? You could actually stay ahead of the curve. Well, with this, I think we can no longer have the economy help us along if we make mistakes. So what I'm training people to do is I'm training people to look at this with different eyes. And that's going to come in the form of owner finance or understanding what we call creative techniques. Now, if you go back and you looked at the last few shows we've done, we've talked about subject to. So if you're interested in that, check on one of the shows that we've done in the past. We've also talked about wraparound mortgages and agreement for deeds. And I want to try to continue that and talk to you a little bit about the other different types of owner finances, because I think it's important that each of us know how to do owner finance types deals, because that's going to be what's going to hit us in the next few months. 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, 10 months down the road, we're going to be forced to understand that. So if you want to kind of wade through this next year and be successful, because I mean, let's face it, real estate millionaires are made by buying low and selling high. I mean, anybody who knows that, anybody that's been around real estate long enough knows that you make your money when you buy. So you buy low, you sell high. And in this economy, everything's been high. So we can't really buy low in the previous economy, the seller's market that we just kind of stepped out of. So we've just been kind of making a little bit of money as we go. But to really, really, truly make wealth, I think that's going to happen in the next year to 5 years, because we're heading back into a buyer's market. Now, a buyer's market means that houses, there's going to be a lot of inventory on the market and there's going to be fewer buyers. Therefore, the sellers are going to be competing for the few amount of buyers there are. Now, when I say few, I mean it's a relative term, right? So the question is, how is that going to affect us, and what should we be paying attention to going into the next phase of this cycle? Right? I mean, anybody that's in the industry long enough understands that the cycle is inevitable. So if you're new and you've not been through a cycle, I'm here to tell you, you need to learn these techniques. You need to learn how to take over a property subject to, where somebody gives you the deed to their home. You need to learn how to, if they won't do that, how to do a wraparound mortgage. Or if somebody owns it free and clear, for example, this is my next, what I would call my next category, or whatever you want to call that, right? Technique, if you will. Owner finance is a technique that you can use on true free and clear properties. Now, how does it work? Well, first off, you have to have a free and clear property. So in order to do owner finance with someone, it has to be free and clear. There can't be a loan, because if there were a loan, you could still do owner finance, but it would be called something else. It would be called a subject to transaction, or a wraparound mortgage, or agreement for deed, or some other form of financing when there's a loan in place. If there is no loan in place, then you can, again, the sky is the limit, because there's no lender except the seller. So now what's important to the seller is what you and that person talk about, what you agree upon. So that's why I think one of the next few things that we're going to be talking about on the show is actually how to negotiate. So stay tuned for the next few shows on, we're going to teach you what elements you should be talking to. How do you talk to sellers? How do you do all this stuff? How do you negotiate? How do you become a better negotiator? But let's stick to the owner finance right now. The definition of owner finance is when the seller of a property that's owned free and clear becomes the bank, and they basically issue you. So, for example, let's take a look at this little example, this graphic here. You've got the seller, who in this case is Mr. Blue. You have me, I'll call me the buyer, Mr. Green. And I go, there's no bank involved, so I go to Mr. Blue and I say, okay, I want to buy your house. Excuse me. Now, what Mr. Seller, or in this case, Mr. Blue, is going to do is we're going to agree on terms. Okay, he's going to give me a promissory note, or he's going to make me sign a promissory note, just like you would any other bank, anything else, right? He's going to sign a promissory note, and I'm going to promise to pay $120,000. Okay. And let's say he says 6%. I go, okay, I agree. And my payment is $720. So if you do the math, that's what it comes out to. So I sign this promissory note. Now, if I just do the promissory note and that's it, nothing else, there's no security instrument, no nothing, and I don't make any payments. Let's say I make one payment and I lose my job and I don't make any payments. The question is, what recourse does the homeowner have with me? Now, if I were in, oh, by the way, somebody just graciously came on and said 33.5 million unemployed, 3.2 million more as of this morning, which is pretty phenomenal. Interesting stats, and I hate to say only getting worse, but only getting worse. So thank you very much for posting that on there, or for sending that comment in. So if for some reason, this is why you need to, as an investor, you need to understand paperwork. Paperwork is your best friend. Paperwork is your saving grace because everything's spelled out. So if for some reason that I don't sign a security instrument, a deed or a mortgage, deed of trust or a mortgage or a security instrument, and I just sign the promissory note and I don't pay, I always ask people, what's the recourse for the homeowner? I'm sorry, not the homeowner, the lender, meaning Mr. Blue here, or the previous seller. And the answer is simple. The only thing that that seller, my lender, can do, if that's all they made me fill out, was the promissory note, the only thing they can do is sue me for the amount I borrowed. They can't foreclose. They can't do anything because they don't have a lien on or a secured interest on the property. That's what the top document does. So he's going to make me sign a or she is going to make me sign a promissory note. Those are the terms: $120,000, 6%, $720 a month. That's my principal and interest payment, right? He's also going to make me sign a security instrument. So depending on the state that you're in, it will be called a security deed. It will be called a deed of trust, or it might be called a mortgage, depending on your state. Now, some of the other things that you need to be aware of is, depending on your state, you also may need an additional document in there. Like in the case of Georgia, we are what's called a non-judicial state. When you're in a non-judicial state, well, let me explain what a judicial versus a non-judicial is. A non-judicial or judicial state means, just so you know, every state in the United States is a judicial state, meaning when you buy a piece of property and there's a lien on it and you don't pay, they can sue you, and they bring a suit, which is called a lis pendens, and it goes before a judge, just like any other lawsuit would go, right? And that generally is a drawn-out process. That's why it takes so long sometimes for some states to foreclose, and their process is quite lengthy. But there are other states out there that are what we call a non-judicial state in addition to the judicial part of it. For example, Georgia is a non-judicial state. And what that means is, a lot of times at closing, when you borrow money or when you go to closing, the lender will require you to sign another document called a waiver of borrower's rights. Simple piece of paper, but very powerful from the lender's perspective, because what it does is, as me, the person signing it, I'm saying I waive my rights to a judicial foreclosure. So I'm waiving all my rights. So now the lender, if I don't make a payment, they don't have to go and file a lawsuit. They can just follow whatever the procedures are for the specific state, for whatever the non-judicial state is. They can follow those procedures. Like, for example, in Georgia, it's really a 3-step process. The first step is the lender is required to send you a notice of default, right? A 3-day notice of default. So telling you that, hey, you're late, right? That usually comes from customer service or whoever the lender is, right? Then after you've been in default, the lender will hire usually an attorney in the state of Georgia, and they will send out what's called a private notification. Now, that private notification doesn't go to anyone in particular except the homeowner, whoever's on the deed, whoever borrowed the money, right? That private notification comes to that individual and says, Mr. Seller, you are $3,000 behind on your payment. You have 30 days to bring it due. Otherwise, we will be continuing the foreclosure process. That's a private notification, comes to the seller, and basically warning them that they have 30 days to bring that $3,000. Well, let's suppose they can't afford it, and they don't bring anything. Then the third step is a third notification. So you have an informal notification, then you have a formal private notification, and then you have another formal public notification. That third public notification is when the attorney that's foreclosing will now publish it in a newspaper, in the legal newspapers, telling the world that you are in default and that this property is foreclosing. And that in the case of Georgia, on the first Tuesday of every single month, this property is going to foreclose at the local courthouse steps. And it literally is, they are literally standing on the steps, and they read their piece of paper, hear you, and they read the security instrument and says, and then once they're done, they open the bid at whatever the opening bid is. And if the lender takes it back or someone bids, that means the homeowner is out. Means the house has been foreclosed upon, and that's how it works. So that's the foreclosure. So these are the documents that you need to understand when you're in real estate, because they are very powerful documents. So if I'm going to borrow money, or if I'm going to owner finance from Mr. Blue, he may want a down payment. He may not want a down payment. Depends on the discussion we have. But let's say for a second, he doesn't want any down payment. He just wants the cash flow for this. He wants me to pay him $720 a month at 6% for 30 years at $120,000. All right. He's going to give me that promissory note. He's also going to give me a security instrument. But the other thing that he also gives me is a warranty deed. That is going to be the ownership of the property. Now, a lot of you may think that when you buy a house, you don't own the house. The bank owns the house. And I wish I had someone in front of me so I could get a check on hands. Hey, John, how are you? Got a comment. John said hi. Hi, John. Let me stick this over here so in case I put comments up. So a lot of times people think the bank owns their home. They do. They do not. When you go to a closing, you are issued the warranty deed. That warranty deed is a transfer of ownership from whoever had it prior to you, the seller, and now they are considered, when they issue that warranty deed to you, they are considered the grantor. You are considered the grantee. Now, I kind of remember it by give or givee. They're giving, I'm receiving. Right? So the grantor is the seller. The grantee is me as the new buyer. In that warranty deed, they are literally stating that they are granting their possession or their rights to this property, their ownership, to me. They sign that, get it notarized, get it stamped and recorded. And when they go down to the courthouse, it's recorded saying that I am now the new owner. So that is the ownership part of it. The other two documents that you see, that's ownership. The other two documents are what we call a lien. It places a lien on the property. So those two documents basically say, hey, there's a lien on the property, so this guy can't sell this thing without paying those off. And it's recorded at the court. The security instrument is recorded at the courthouse as well. Now, how these documents all flow is the original warranty deed gets signed at closing. So Mr. Blue would sign the warranty deed and issue it to me in my name. That original document goes down to the courthouse, gets filed, stamped, and coded into a book, deed book and page. And then the original comes back, gets mailed back to me as the owner. So I have the deed. I have the original blue ink signature of the deed. Okay. They have the copy. The promissory note, when I sign that at the closing table, that original document goes to the seller for safekeeping on their part. And then the security instrument, the original document with my blue ink signature, goes down to the courthouse and gets filed, and then a copy gets given to the the seller. So he has both a copy of the security instrument or deed or mortgage, an original of the promissory note, and he keeps that, or she keeps that, in a very protected spot, safety deposit box, whatever, right? So that is how the paperwork flows. So now I just simply, in that promissory note, I just say, hey, Mr. Blue, I write my checks because my paperwork says he's the bank. So instead of writing it to Wells Fargo, Bank of America, some of the other major lenders, I'm now writing that check to Mr. Blue, or in this case, Mr. Seller. And that's who I write my check to, and he just deposits it. Now, you can choose when you owner finance he can choose to escrow, just like a bank or a lending institution would do, taxes and insurance. So in addition to that $720, I'm also going to send him money escrowed, or in addition to, for taxes and insurance. Now, if I were the one owner financing it to someone, that's how I would do it, because if I leave it up to the person that's owning it to pay the taxes and insurance, and they don't, if a fire happens and they have no insurance, or if they don't pay the taxes and somebody comes in for a few $1,000s and takes the property out from under me just for the cost of taxes, that could be a bad thing. So that's why most banks will escrow those funds. It's not because they want to be nice and take that burden off your shoulder. That is not why, right? So they want to make sure that they're protected. And if you don't make the insurance, a lot of what I'll call traditional lenders, they put what's called forced insurance on the property. So if you don't make your payments, or if you don't have insurance, they check on that. They make sure that you have insurance. If they notice you don't have insurance, they will force place their insurance on that property and then charge you for that difference. And those fees can be usually huge. Whereas you might pay, $100 a month for insurance. Normally, with force-placed insurance, that may be triple that, because it's not cheap insurance. And so that might be why someone's interest rate, their mortgage payment may be sky high, even though they have a lower interest rate, because they may have force-placed insurance. So keep that in mind when you're looking at these. Now, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to address any questions online. And let me see if we've got any. Nope, no, none yet. So let's move on. So that's true owner finance. So now let's move on to another technique called sandwich lease options. Sandwich lease options are the benefit of, well, let me go back for a second to the true owner finance right here. The benefit of something like this is you own the property, you own the deed, right? So you get all the appreciation, the depreciation, tax benefits, you name it, every benefit, you get to keep it all, right? Whereas in a lease with an option to purchase, or in this case, a sandwich lease. A sandwich lease option is where you take an option. We haven't even talked about what an option is, but you take an option on the property. I have an option to buy this. So I can buy it, or I don't necessarily need to buy it. I just want an option to buy it, right? I'm not saying I have to buy it. So there's a lot of things that people Sometimes when we do this, we talk about lease options or lease purchases. Those are two different things. Although we use them a lot of times synonymously, they are two different entities just by the sheer verbiage of them. Sandwich lease option is basically, it's a lease with an option to purchase, whereas a sandwich lease purchase is a lease with a purchase agreement saying I will purchase the property. So a lease with an option, the option just says I have an option to purchase. It doesn't mean I will. So that option basically spells out the terms and says, okay, I agree to buy it for X or option it for X. If I choose to buy this, this is what we call the strike price. This is the option price. And a lot of times it could be what the seller owes, if they're especially they're in distress. So that option might be what they owe. So let's say they owe $100,000. Well, that option might be for $100,000 of what they owe. It could also be for $110,000. If they only owe $100,000, but they want $10,000 and you don't want to give it to them up front, you could say, I will option this property from you for $110,000. Now they only get that $10,000 when you actually exercise your option. Okay. The other thing that is a lease. So you are going to lease it from them. So if you look at the little house right there that you see, that is the seller's payment is $950. That's what his payment is, and he's asking $95,000. Okay, so that's the option. So I'm going to option it for exactly what his payment is and exactly what he owes. So I'm going to say I'm going to option it for $95,000, and I'm going to lease it from you for $950 a month. Now he's not getting anything; he's just getting out from under it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn around and I'm going to market this to somebody else out there in the real estate world for $150,000. I'm going to market it and say this house is worth $150,000, and I want $1,250 a month as my lease payment. So I've got it from Mr. Blue at $950 a month, and my option price is $95,000. Then I'm going to take that and I'm going to market that up. I'm going to mark it up, and I'm going to market it, and I'm going to say this thing I want $150 for this house. Now, obviously, you have to do your numbers, and the numbers have to work. But let's just say that's where negotiating comes in. But let's just say the house is worth $150, and the market rent is $1,250, right? So I will get Mr. Green to give me an option, or he will take an option on the property for $150,000. And he will also give me, so he's going to give me, in exchange for that option, I'm going to look for an option payment, what we call a non-refundable option payment. And you don't really want to use this as a down payment because that's different. It's an option payment, which is non-refundable. Now, that option payment can go against the principal, meaning come off the principal. So if I apply that, I can say, okay, well now when he goes to exercise that option, he only has to exercise it for $145. He only owes now $145 because he gave me $5,000 up front. So in a sandwich lease option, you typically may have 3 paydays. The first payday is the option consideration that he puts down when you get the option agreement. So he's going to give you $5,000. Then you're going to lease it for $1,250 from him. And the difference now is your second payday. Your second payday is the difference between $1,250 and the $950 I'm paying to my seller. Right? So if my payment is $950 and my income is $1,250, I'm keeping $300 in the middle. So that's my second payday. My third payday comes when my tenant buyer actually cashes me out and I exercise my option with my seller, and I get paid the difference. So when he exercises his option for 150, he brings 150. I set up the closing where I'm only paying 95. So I've already gotten 5. So that means instead of getting $55,000 at closing, I'm only going to get 50 because I already got 5. So those are the 3 paydays. Now this sounds absolutely wonderful, and it is, and it can be. But what's the danger? The danger is when you do a sandwich lease option, there's relatively no exposure, meaning on your part from, you don't have to put a lot of money out for this. But here's the danger of doing something like that. And this is why I kind of do it as one of my last resorts. Because now I do lease options, but doing what we call here a sandwich lease option is a little bit different. For example, I'm sandwiched in the middle. The problem with something like this is I don't own the property. So if Mr. Blue goes out and does something stupid, gets a lawsuit filed against him, files bankruptcy, does something stupid where he gets a lien or judgment against the property because the property is still in his name because all I have is an option to buy it, right? I have equitable interest in it. I don't have a legal interest in it, right? So when that happens, I cannot now give good, clean, marketable title to my tenant buyer. So if for some reason, while that's in bankruptcy or while the judgment is pending and so on and so forth, and let's just make it a judgment, right? If there's a judgment that attaches to that property because Mr. Blue went out and got into a car accident and someone filed a lawsuit and got it attached to him and attached to everything he owns, that gets attached to that house. It can't get paid off. I mean, it won't become free and clear until that house, till that lien or judgment gets paid off. So therefore, you can't in turn go give good, clean, marketable title to Mr. Green, your tenant buyer. That's the risk in a sandwich lease option. So, I mean, and if you can't give good, clean, marketable title, guess what you have to do to the $5,000? You really technically need to give it back to them, even though it's non-refundable. It's non-refundable because you have to give them good, clean title. Well, if you haven't given them a good piece of real estate, you got to give them their money back. So if they're in there for 2 years and you've spent that $5,000, it could be a big problem. So now, how do you use a lease? So take the word sandwich off. And let's say I buy something on owner financing, whether I buy it subject to, whether I buy it on a lease, buy it on an agreement for deed, or I buy it on a wraparound mortgage, right? Where I have it, I can turn around and sell it on a lease with an option to buy all day long. And I do that every day, all day long. Because I own the property. I have the deed. So if Mr. Seller goes out and does something stupid, doesn't matter. I already own it. They can't put a lien on the property that he doesn't own anymore. I own it. So that's why I like to buy the property, get the deed, and then do a lease with an option to purchase. So that's my first choice. So if you look at these things on the left-hand side, all the ways to buy and all the ways to sell, you will see there's kind of a hierarchy there, and it goes in order in which that's usually my order of preference, if you will. Okay, so let's talk about option. I probably should have put the option first, but if all else fails and you go into a situation and maybe like I had a student the other day say, look, I have this property. I'd like to take it over subject to. It's got great cash flow. It's got pretty good cash flow, $500-600 a month, but they're $18,000 or $19,000 behind, and there's a little bit of equity, $20,000, $25,000, but it needs a bunch of work too. It needs a bunch of repairs. So for that person to literally buy it subject to, they would be taking ownership of that and be fully responsible for everything. But instead, I said, well, don't do that, because he didn't have the, $60, $70, $80,000 to bring it current, fix it up, and then hope he gets a seller to buy it. I said, don't do that. Just take an option on the property. So the option is, in this case, a $100,000 option. So I come to Mr. Blue and I say, I want to option your property for $100,000. Then I go and I say, all right, I want to market this, because that option allows me to market it, because I have some interest in that property now. So now I can market that thing for 120. When somebody says, yep, I'm interested, I simply now put a purchase and sale agreement with Mr. Green, in this case, my new buyer. And then I go back to my seller and say, okay, now I want to exercise my option. So now I do a purchase and sale agreement with them for 100. And then I do what's called a double close or simultaneous close. Now, some of you that know what that is say attorneys don't do that anymore. Yes, they do. Okay. At least in Georgia and other states that I've been around, I know for a fact they do it. Okay. Now, there are certain requirements to do a double close. The lenders, if there's a true loan on it through a lender, they may need to be notified. They may say no, but you can do a double close. But there's also other alternatives to that. You can do what's called transactional funding. So you can set this all up on the same day at the same time and pay someone a small $500 fee to bring the $120 or to bring the $100,000 and sit it in the account long enough for the 120 to come in, pay that off, money goes back to your transactional lender, and you keep the 19,500. You pay the lender $500 for their transactional funding for 10 minutes worth of work. Okay, so that's how. So going back to my student, I said, take an option on the property. Cost you nothing. He gave him a $25 gift card, I think, to Amazon or gas or whatever. He took the option, and now you can go out and you can say, hey, I have this house. It's a handyman special. You do all the repairs. I'm looking for 20% down, but I'll finance the whole thing. So he's looking for someone to bring $20,000 to the table to finance this. Now, this wasn't a $100,000 house. This was more like a $300,000 house or more, I think. So those numbers worked. So someone that moves into that type of home would have $20,000. So he can take that $20,000 and guess what? He can now go to the reinstatement and reinstate the $18,000, still put a couple $1,000s in his pocket. The owner's willing to do all the repairs themselves. So now he put a couple $1,000s in his pocket. He also is now getting $500 a month positive cash flow for the next 10 years or whenever the balloon is on this, that the person has to refinance it, all because he knew how to use an option agreement. So that's how you use options. There's many, many ways. I mean, there's some pretty creative guys out there that do options almost like artwork. I mean, it's pretty phenomenal how powerful an option can actually be. That's just a basic option. So there's lots of, once you understand a little bit about options, the sky really is the limit with the option, because you have a very powerful tool because you have the option. And if it's an exclusive option, that person can't sell it without taking care of that option first. Okay. So, and then one of the last ones that I want to talk about is, I mean, obviously cash. We don't really need to talk about cash. Cash is pretty simple. But let's talk about a short sale, because that's going to be important to us as investors going forward. That was really important in 2008. And now in 2020, with what I anticipate the lending situation to be, because right now lenders are starting to tighten up. They're either not lending until they see what's going on, or they've changed their requirements, meaning they've tightened their belts, meaning the credit score you may have to have a better credit score, or you may have to have a little better debt to income ratio, right? They're not quite as liberal with that. So that's going to shrink the number of people that can go out and get readily available financing. So that's going to open up doors for everybody to say, okay, well, now if I learn how to buy right and I know how to negotiate and I know which techniques to use, those people that were on the bubble that have a little bit of money but just quite missed the mark of getting a new loan, guess what? Now they're a perfect candidate for a lease with an option to purchase or owner finance. And once the lending requirements kind of loosen up again, then they can refinance that and you get your money out of it. So there's lots of reasons, but a short sale, things that I think you guys need to be paying attention to in the upcoming months, as far as terminology goes, is deferment, short sales, and forbearance. These are all terms that banks are throwing out there as buzzwords. Banks are saying, okay, the government's saying we're going to put a moratorium on all payments for the next 3 months or 4 months or whatever it comes out to be. Well, and the banks are going, yep, okay, we'll agree to that because everybody wants to play nice in this time frame. But when this is all said and done and the banks go, okay, we're back to normal now, we need to get our money, they're going to come and they're going to say, okay, you need to pay us. And they're going to take those 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months that you're behind, and they're going to have to do something with that. They're on a deferment. They can defer the payments till later. They can do a forbearance, and they can take those payments and let's say they're 6 months behind and your payment's $1,000. That's $6,000. Well, they may say to you, okay, we're going to spread those payments out over 12 months. So from this point forward, for the next 12 months, you're going to add an additional $250 or whatever it is, $250, $300 to your payment. I think it's $250. To your payment each month. So not only are you going to pay $1,000, but now you're going to pay another $250 to catch yourself up. Well, if you've got people that are in trouble now and maybe lost their job and are now trying to find a new job, 6 months from now is not going to be enough to catch up. Not just to catch up, but also to catch up plus. They may not even be able to keep going with their normal $1,000. So what's going to happen is bankruptcies are going to be on the climb. Foreclosures are going to be on the climb. You've got landlords that if their tenants don't pay, they're not going to be able to afford their payments on their properties. So you've got a whole array of things that can happen, but right now aren't happening. So everyone's like, oh, it'll be fine. We're going to get back to normal. Folks, I love for that to be the case, but I really don't think that's going to be how it's going to work. I think we will get back to somewhat normal, and I think they're going to have to make a bunch of adjustments. I think the banks are going to have to make adjustments. But if the banks at the end of the day choose not to do that, it's going to create a bunch of fallout. So I hope I'm wrong. I pray I'm wrong. But if I'm not wrong, you as investors need to be ready. And you need to be ready by learning how to buy these properties creatively. And you need to be what we call a transaction engineer. And with that, I'm probably going to leave that where it is. I'm going to talk about short sales in a little bit, for a few minutes. But if you don't know what a short sale is, I'm going to explain it to you. A short sale is, here's our documents that we've been talking about for the last 3 or 4 shows. Okay, when you go buy a property. You buy a property, they give you a promissory note, they give you a security instrument, and they give you the deed to the property. Well, that promissory note, you have to pay back to, let's call it Bank of America, right? If you don't have all the money or the value of this house drops below what you owe, and you go back and you ask the bank to take less than what's owed on the property. So let's say the property is not worth 100, or maybe it is worth right at 100, but it needs a bunch of repairs. The bank can look at that and go, okay, we will agree to take less than what's owed and release the lien, but we have to agree to that. And that's the short sale process. So basically what happens is they come in and whoever is going to buy that property on a short sale is usually going to pay less. In this case, let's say I pay $65,000. Well, I have to go back to the lender, or the seller has to go to the lender and get permission to take $35,000 less than what's owed. Now, that $35,000 that's left, the bank can do several things with that. They can completely satisfy it and pretend like everything was paid off. That's called a satisfied loan. Or they can do simply what's called a release of lien. That release of lien is still holding the homeowner accountable for the additional $35,000 that they owed them. But they're going to release the security instrument holding the property. So they're going to say, oh, you can take the property, but you, Mr. Seller, I'm going to hold you to that $35,000. I'm going to release the lien, but not the obligation. So there's a full satisfaction, which satisfies everything as if it were paid in full. Then there's a release of lien. And then there's a couple things that bank, once that happens, if it's a release of lien, the bank's going to do one of two things. They're either going to file a lawsuit for the difference, okay, and they're going to, basically go after the difference, or in most cases, more probable. I've never seen a bank do that, by the way, but I'm sure they have. I just never seen it in 20 some years. More appropriately, or what I think would happen, is they will issue what's called a 1099 to the homeowner, showing that they got an additional $33,000 or $35,000, and then what you as the what the homeowner would be responsible for, whatever their tax bracket is, it would be showing up on their taxes as if they received $35,000 that they didn't get. Okay, that's what would happen potentially if the lender does that. So that's a short sale, and that's kind of how the basics work. All right, so I hope that you've learned a little bit, enjoyed a little bit. In the coming shows, we are going to be talking more about owner financing, talking about negotiations. By all means, I'd love to talk to you live, put a comment in there. But if you're interested in education, there's a couple places that I'd like you to check out. One, you can go to my site called htrei.com. You can go by, and we sell many different courses. We offer many different educational courses. We have, in fact, 19 different courses that are available, ranging any from wholesaling, subject to, private lending, rehabbing, etc. So if you're interested in that, please check it out. Also, I'll put that up there. Also, what I would like you to do, if you are watching me on YouTube and you haven't subscribed, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. I'm trying to get myself up to 1,000 subscribers, and I'm begging for subscribers so that I can actually stream live on my phone. They won't let me YouTube won't let me stream live on my phone until I hit 1,000 subscribers. So I'm begging for subscribers here. It's good content, information. Also, if you are also interested in any kind of coaching, we do coaching as well. We do a weekly coaching session called Property Protege Group. We spend every Wednesday with you, usually from 6:30 all the way up. If you're interested in checking that out, no obligation necessary, but you would need to go to, you need to go to, you can go to PPG Coaching to get more information, but you would need to go to aria.us/PPG online, and then you would need to type in there I think it's called First Timers or First Timer. Let me put that up there for you for a coupon code. First time. So this will be your coupon code for that if you're looking for any kind of group coaching. So thank you very much, everyone. I really hope you enjoyed this. Please think about subscribing. Give me a like, a thumbs up, any comment. Love to talk to you. I do answer all my comments. So until next time, this is Don DeRosa, and this is another show for Expert Real Estate Coaching. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful night. God bless. And don't lick anything. Wash your hands and take care. Thank you.